So this morning, sovereignty of God. This is a topic that's been on my mind for quite a while. One of my phrases that I used in youth ministry a lot because we dealt with a lot of kids that weren't from the church. They say a healthy youth group should be 10% the size of a church. Okay, that's a good gauge. We're at that level. In Milwaukee, it was a bit of an anomaly because our church was about 70 people and our youth group was 85, and we had 25 in our college group. And so that indicates we had a lot of kids from the neighborhood that were coming to our youth group and being a part of it that weren't part of the church, that necessarily may have not have heard the gospel message preached to them before, but they liked the programming and what was going on and wanted to be a part of it. And I remember one time I walked up and I just said to the teenagers, I said, you know what, if I wanted to tonight, if I wanted to at any point in my life, I could choose to go to hell. It's true. It really is. I could choose that path if I want to go that way, but I can also choose to go to heaven. All right. And that's a choice we have. Even though I was raised in the church, an Assembly of God church in Milwaukee, and never really strayed from the church. There was never a point in my life where I'm like, I'm leaving the church. I loved it. I loved my upbringing. I loved everything about it. There were moments that I questioned things, but I think that's natural, right? Scientifically, it's proven that 2021 is when the critical thinking skills are really catching in and kicking in. And that's when you start, just thinking bigger picture and all that. So I had those moments, but it was one of those things where it literally came down to that. I have no complaints about my upbringing. My parents were strict in getting us to church. The generations today, it's like, that's spiritual abuse. You should let your kid decide. Baloney, you're the parent. Okay. You're going to church. It's a non-negotiable. We're going to church. That's a non-negotiable. And it lays a foundation for us. And Father Richard Rohr's book, he's a Catholic priest. He writes a lot about spirituality. He wrote a book called Falling Upward, and he talks about the two phases of life. And the first phase of life is almost militant because parents were laying such a strong foundation so that when the kids get older, and he even goes one step further and says, we're trying to get our kids to have a healthy ego, even if it seems to be a big ego when they're a kid. They're forming that in their life, and the spiritual formation that they're having is laying a firm foundation. Sounds biblical, doesn't it? The wise man built his house upon a firm foundation. There's a great kids song, but I will refrain from that in the actions as well. And so it's literally saying so that when they hit the second phase of life, they know who they are. The pressing for the ego, the pressing for a firm foundation, it's there. It's not as much of a priority anymore because you know who you are and you're going from there, and you're just going and growing in life. And so where does that come from? Why doesn't God ever just say, you're in, you're out, all of that stuff? The sovereignty of God is a fundamental doctrine that speaks to his ultimate authority and control over all things. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. A famous pastor that has passed away in the early 2000s, Adrian Rogers, said, God does not pick and choose who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. Who will accept Jesus Christ and who will reject him? These are decisions left up to us. In his sovereignty, he gives us freedom of choice so that we can truly love him. If he made us choose, that would result in forced love, which is a contradiction in terms. Adrian Rogers is a solid voice in the Christian faith. Right up there. There's like the pillars of the Christian faith. There's Adrian Rogers. How many remember the old radio show J. Vernon McGee, Walk Through the Bible? Solid, okay? Like he sounds like he's broadcasting from a barn in Poughkeepsie, but he's like solid in his faith and nationally syndicated. His show's still on, wrote commentaries, everything. But it brings us back to, okay, so God is sovereign, and we need to understand the sovereignty of God. You see, God reigns over all creation. This is something we know. But Psalms 103:19 says, the Lord has established his throne in heaven, and his kingdom rules over all. This verse powerfully proclaims God's reign over the universe. No matter where we go, what we face, what other people proclaim, we know that God's established his kingdom, and his reign over the universe. His throne in heaven symbolizes his ultimate authority and his kingdom and encompasses everything. A couple weeks ago, I referenced that I think that currently there are, okay, now take this with a grain of salt, there are 3,000 other gods that people have made up. Okay. 3,000. Like, what are you worshiping? Like, it's just amazing what people come up with. I get sad when I see people that leave the Christian faith and end up going into the whole thing of chakra and crystals and all that stuff. It seems like that's a little more of the trend these days with a younger crowd, that when they leave, they turn to that. I'm like, what? I actually, you used to worship the person that made the crystal. Okay. It really comes down to that. But where's that coming from? Where did that go from? It causes us to think a little bit about, that if his throne is in heaven and it does symbolize his ultimate authority, have we had that encounter with him yet? Well, why? It's like the disciple that said, where else are we going to turn? Where else could we go? There's famous Christian musicians that have shared their testimonies of they've tried everything under the sun. That whole Jesus movement era from the 60s and 70s, this came out of the hippie movement. They tried a lot of stuff, okay? I think of the Keith Green's testimony where he said he tried everything from Eastern mysticism to Buddhism to all sorts of stuff. He goes, I didn't find any fulfillment in anything except in God. And so it really causes me to wonder, has the person that walked away ever truly encountered God? Because if you have, I don't think you're going to walk away from it. And I don't say that from a pious statement. I don't say that from being naive. I'm saying it as a 50-year-old that's grown up in the faith and never. My testimony is this: I tried one cigarette in my life. Okay, never had a can of beer. All right, never touched this stuff. I have bought a can of beer. Let me confess. It was one time I had the WWF cookbook in my from Christmas, and there was a beer can chicken in there. I don't know, it's not Gangrel. He had deviled eggs. China had something else. But anyways, it was a beer can chicken. I'm like, I want to try this because I like beer brats and I like that sort of stuff. So I go to the beer barrel next to BP. Never bought a can of beer in my life. It was like Old Milwaukee I bought, or Schlitz. It was like, yeah. When people found out what I bought, they were like, "What? Are you serious? Just throw the chicken away." And I remember I'm at the register and I'm like, I'm like a teen trying to buy something illegal. I was like 34, 35 at the time, and sitting at the register. And once you know it, doggone it, more people from First Assembly of God and here were in that parking lot, and I'm like, and number one, I'm like, well, what are you doing in here, you sinner, And then, but then I took it and went in the other side of the gas station to pick up some stuff, and I had it, and as I was looking, I'm like, it's in a brown bag, even, But so that was the only time I really bought beer. But the reason I say that is that I come from a life of not swaying a whole lot. I'm not trying to prop my testimony up against anybody else. Praise God for where we've all come from. We've all done different things. We've all tried different things. For me, my testimony is I never walked away from God. I never walked away from the church. I've had questions, but that's who I am. The most rebellious I've gotten as far as substances was a dare to smoke down a Marlboro and buy a can of beer for my chicken. Okay. That's about it. But at the same time, that makes me wonder. So I come from that background saying, why would you walk away? I know that by the world's rationale, I had every reason to. By the world's rational decisions, you have every opportunity to walk away in the world's view. But it's because you've tasted and seen that the Lord is good. He's sovereign. He's not going to force us. He's saying, you chose this. You chose to walk this life. And so he lets us. He has us come into a relationship with him. No matter the situations we face, we can take control and take comfort in knowing that God is in control. He oversees all aspects of creation, both the vastness of the universe and the details of our universe, of our lives. I'm sorry. And so, what's happening over in the Middle East right now? He's not surprised by this. In fact, the Bible's talked about they are not going to ever like the people of Israel. People aren't going to like Christians because of the stances we take. The recent news out of Israel, Netanyahu, where the drones were targeting his own residence and threatening his wife. And the headline was this: Netanyahu's words to Iran, "You've made a grave mistake." Like, oh boy, buckle in here. Okay. Things are, it was a victorious week for them over there. But yet it's like they keep trying. God's not surprised by this. What happens in the US? God already knows the turnout of the election. We don't. God already knows where that's going. He's all in control. He's in control of what's happening in our world today. And so, how awesome is God to be able to say, I love you, I love you, I love you. You have a choice that you can choose to follow me or go the other way. But he desires to enter in a relationship with us. God reigns over all creation. Number 2, God is sovereign in our circumstances. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This well-known promise reassures us that God orchestrates every event in our lives for our good and his glory. Something bad's happened, he can use it for good. Something devastating has taken place, he'll turn it around. It's what he does. He's in the business of redemption. The accident that happened, you know what? It's horrible that it did. We'd wish that on nobody. But somehow God can bring about a good thing out of something bad. You hear that all the time. Like, let's go back to the Christian music stuff or a famous preacher. They pass away and it's like, oh, well, there goes him. It's unfortunate. But it almost elevates the person because more and more people hear about him and study the words that he has to say about who God is. And so God is sovereign in our circumstances. Even in trials and suffering, God's sovereignty ensures that nothing happens outside of his divine plan. And we can trust that every hardship, every joy, every mundane day serves as a purpose in his grand design. There's a purpose for why we're here. There's a purpose for what we do. Sometimes you get into those conversations, and as I've mentioned in the past, you get into the weeds of Christianity, and people start arguing, well, God has already chosen who's going to heaven and who's not, and all of that stuff, and they misinterpret scripture and all of that. And it's like, no, God truly gives us a choice. He lets us decide. And when we get to decide, a lot of junk comes into the world, right? I mean, a lot of things happen. When sin entered the world, that means, you know what? Bad decisions, poor choices. With poor choices, not only becomes mental decisions, but what we do with our bodies and what we eat and other substances, all of this stuff. And it begins to break us down. And so every day is a gift. Brennan Manning, another famous author who's passed away and who just grew in his teachings, and people found out about who he was after he passed, wrote a book called The Ragamuffin Gospel. And if you don't know what the Ragamuffin Gospel is, and you're looking for a really good read, look it up. Look it up. It's really a fantastic book. But Brennan Manning wrote a book towards the end of his life on it was a biography. It was called All is Grace. I love that. All is grace. It's God's grace. Everything we do, everything we say, the joys we have in our life, the blessings we have in our life, it's all God's grace. But there are terrible things that happen. There are difficult circumstances that arise. And as I said at my Aunt Shirley's funeral last Monday, I reminded them of the words of Dan Johnson, who spoke here and said, if you're going to cry, isn't it better to be in the Lord's lap than just out on your own? It's true. This is the result of the world we live in. There's brokenness, there's disease, there's death. But through it all, God's still good. He's still there for us. And a lot of us have experienced that before. You have something big that has happened. And you sit back and you say, this is horrible. I don't want to be here. You're in good company with a lot of other people in the Bible. Trust me on that. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here. Even Jesus said, Lord, Father, if it's your will, take this cup from me. However, here we are in the situation, and wouldn't we rather be walking with God than out on our own? So we make that choice that God is sovereign in our circumstances. He knows what we're going through. It's like the chaplain that I tell you about who visited a friend of ours in the hospital after a tragic event. His first words, and I was just mesmerized. They're so simple. And I've kind of, hospital chaplains, they're good people. They really are. And I appreciate what they do. But a lot of times, for me, when you're going through a difficult thing, their words they almost seem textbook, like they're just throwing words out, and it's Reverend Lovejoy from The Simpsons. They're there, that sort of thing. He walks into the room and he goes, God's not surprised by this. Like, wow, that just hit right between the eyes. God is not surprised by this. And then going back to my friend Dan Johnson, my pastor growing up, the first one. When I was going through some health issues, I shared with him going in next week for a surgery and kind of nervous about it. And he goes, God's already there waiting for you. Like, what in the world? Those words just like, bing, just hit. Like, I should know this, I should know this already. But sometimes we need to be reminded of those simple truths that God is there. He's with us. He's walking with us through this. So God is sovereign in all of our circumstances. And God's will prevail. God's will prevails in all situations. Proverbs 19:21, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Ever tell you how I kind of honed in on my preaching skills? It's kind of funny, actually. So the Assemblies of God has a thing called Fine Arts Festival. And it's used to be held here in Wapaka, not the Wapaka Fine Arts Festival, but the Assembly of God Fine Arts Festival. They held it at the high school because it was central. Now they do it in Oak Creek. And as a teenager in the youth program, you could sign up for things. So what are you good at? And then ultimately, if you get a superior, you go on to the nationals, and then you can get a scholarship for Bible college. Well, I entered a lot of different things. Okay. I entered human video. You know what human videos are? Good. All right. It's basically a youth group acting out words to a Christian song that has a lot of meaning. They're cringe at best, but there's been some good ones. So I entered human video with a team. I entered male solo. Okay. I entered graphic design. I entered short sermon, all in one weekend. I entered all of these things. The lowest rating was human video. It's just not my thing. I didn't want to do it. But my friend wanted me to fill a spot. Male solo wasn't a low grade, wasn't a high grade, but I could lead worship in a pinch if I had to, but I don't play instruments. Short sermon and graphic design were my two superior ratings. All right. And so I went on to do that. I went on to finals and got scholarship for a Bible college I never went to because it was too expensive anyway. So I ended up staying and doing a mentorship program through the assemblies and all of that. And it was through that I had other ideas. It's at a young age, I wanted to be a semi driver, Josh. That was my life goal. My cousin drove for Transtar. And so that was like eastbound and down. Let's go. Okay. We're going to do this. And that didn't work out. I wanted to be a park ranger. Okay. I love forestry. I love DNR. I like all that stuff. And Ranger Bob, it just works. Okay. Didn't do that. And so ultimately when God got a hold of me, I was still struggling because I wanted to go into, I loved graphic design. I had a full scholarship for Cardinal Stritch University to go into graphic design. And God got a hold of me and said, I want you to do youth ministry. I want you to go into ministry. And I did. And God's will always prevails. We always have our own thing we want to do. At some point in life, we do settle into what God's called us to do. but his will always prevails. While we may set up our own plans and desires, this verse reminds us that God's purpose is paramount in our life. His will is ultimately what comes to pass. And this truth invites us to submit our ambitions and dreams to him, knowing that his plans surpass our understanding and are always for our ultimate good. That job promotion, should I go for it or should I wouldn't? I feel really good about it. Go for it. If it's meant to be, God's going to provide it. If you're feeling good about it and you have a peace about it, I'm a firm believer, and that's how God speaks to us. He gives you a peace about something. Maybe it's a move. Maybe it's something else. God will reveal it to you if it's meant to be. It's going to happen. If it's not meant to be open to that as well. And understand some doors close. And you move on and you stay content at where you're at in life. But the truth is, he invites us to submit our ambitions and dreams to him, knowing that his plans surpass our understanding, as I've said. And when we're in the thick of it, it's hard to see that. It's hard to understand that. That's where our testimony comes in. Knowing that we've come this far with him, he's not going to let us go now. It just means right now, it's a no. And if you're like me, you've had a lot of no's in your life. And that's okay. It's God watching out for you. It's God protecting us. It's God keeping us from, getting into a situation and then wondering, why in the world did I do this? What was the purpose of this? And honestly, there's some things that are so little, it's like, just do it. Just if it means helping yourself, do it. When I was sharing with someone before service that when I was a single youth pastor, I had a livable income, had a little 1-bedroom apartment in Bayview. It was nice. But I got bored at night because it was Wednesdays and Sundays at church, office during the daytime. So I hit up a friend. I'm like, you guys need a dishwasher? I'm honestly bored and I don't mind making a little extra cash. Did I have to pray long and hard about that? No. It's like, it's okay. Did I have to wait for God's divine purpose in becoming a dishwasher? No. Some things are like that. All right. But the bigger stuff, we really need to tune in and understand God has a plan for everything that we do. And so, number 4, God is sovereign in salvation. For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will. And so in these verses, we see God's sovereignty in choosing and redeeming us. He's chosen us. Are we willing to accept that call? Are we willing to come into that invitation? There's an old worship song that said, we are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, and it's true that we are seen very highly in God's eyes. We're his kid. He's our heavenly Father. Before the foundation of the world, God had a plan for our salvation. Everything from Genesis 1:1 points to what Jesus did for us on the cross and the resurrection. From the very moment Adam and Eve fell into sin in the garden and they had to be covered for their nakedness, that was all a precursor leading up to what Jesus ultimately did for us. This affirms that our relationship with God is not contingent on our own effort, but as a result of his loving and sovereign choice. And we can rejoice in the fact that our salvation rests secure in his hands. We're going to face a lot of storms. I've told you that. We're going to face a lot of ups. We're going to face a lot of downs. And as I've mentioned before, I think when we're in the valleys is when we really start connecting with God even more. Best example I can use of this is if you've ever had to call tech support on your computer. Okay? You know your computer, right? You know how to turn it on. You know the USB drive, the HDMI cable and all that stuff, but you don't know your computer. You know it's a HP, okay? You know it's a Mac, you know it's these things. You know how the power button on the monitor, but you don't know your computer. However, when you accidentally wipe the hard drive or crash a program or a virus gets in and you got to call tech support, guess what? You're going to get to know your computer, because they're going to walk you through things and have you do key configurations and all of this stuff that's going to get you to know your computer very, very well. And that's how it is, I believe, with Jesus, with God, is that we know God. Okay, we know God very well, but it's through those moments of darkness, those moments in the valley, that life has a way of, number one, reintroducing us to ourselves, and us digging in deeper to get to know God on a very, very personal level. I know I've had some knockout, drag out prayers with God in the past, questioning, being irritated, didn't question God, didn't question my faith. I had a lot of bold questions, had a lot of thoughts in my head that I had to get out in prayer. Why would this happen? Where are you in all this? You called to this, and all of that. I've been there, done that. That's when you really get to know who God is through those difficult times. And God is sovereign in all of those moments. And this affirms that our relationship with God is not contingent on our own effort, but is a result of his loving and sovereign choice. The sovereignty of God is a source of hope and assurance for all believers. He reigns over all creation, works with all things for our good, ensures his purpose prevails, and sovereignly orchestrates our salvation. And as we navigate life's challenges and its uncertainties, we have to remember that God is in control. We're only days away from a big decision in the U.S. God's in control. God is in control. We're looking hourly at what's going on over in Israel and all that stuff. God is in control. You're at home looking at your kids and sometimes the choices they make. God's in control. The personal war that's going on in your head. Should I do this? Should I do that? God's in control of that. Okay? The things that are happening at work, everything, God is in control. Stay in tune with him. Find time for prayer. Take care of yourself and focus on him. Sometimes life can get so busy, so crazy, you don't feel like doing anything else, but a good nap sounds really good. Have you been there before? There's something very biblical about that, by the way. I went on a silent prayer retreat many times over at St. Norbert Abbey. The retreat director, he would say, if any of you fell asleep after you got here after the first session, he goes, don't beat yourself up. Sometimes we just need to find rest in order to hear clearly from God. But God is in control, and he desires a continuing relationship with each one of us. He's not surprised by anything we're going through. The thoughts that pop into our head, not surprised. But he cares for us enough to say, I love you. Come to me with your problems. Come to me with your burdens. And he'll bring rest to us.